You're listening to The Bill McIntosh Show. Imagine if the culture war against our monuments and founding fathers ceased, and the communists behind this cultural desecration movement were exposed and charged with treason. Imagine if the war against whites and Western culture and America itself were ended and harmony restored, and the nefarious actions of communist China and the traitorous activity of professors in colleges and universities and teachers K through 12 were laid bare with all their destructive Marxist calculations. Imagine if because of your activism and mine, we restored the rule of law and the security of our borders. Imagine all that happening, but that, heaven forbid, many marriages of pro-family, pro-MAGA, patriotic Christian activists went down the drain, ending in divorces and shattered families. Imagine if excessive activism put our marriages and families at risk and even jeopardized, God forbid, our eternal salvation, all due to neglecting our spouse and all that followed in our families. Thinking of all this, let's dedicate more time now to our marriages and families before it's too late. They say January is the divorce month. Well, let's make it the month we decide to rededicate ourselves to our marriages so that this great America we aspire to restore shines bright within our families and from coast to coast. In this spirit, let's listen to a marriage success story now that can help us. Bill McIntosh Show now on with Heather Carter, who's been on before with us, and also Blake Carter, her handsome and very capable pastor husband, who we'll introduce in a second. Heather Carter, unless you've forgotten, is the author of the book Soul Selfie, a mother, wife, and realtor and a cancer survivor. She had leukemia as an adult, which is not a joke. Her writings mine the deep well of the common plagues of the heart, and I'm quoting her, the common plagues of the heart. And her website, of course, is heathercarterwrites.com. And she's currently also, she's a realtor. As I said, she lives in Springfield, Illinois. And Blake Carter is a pastor. He's been married to Heather for 30 years with 3 kids, full-time vocational ministry. He's a board member of a church planning organization. And he's currently senior manager of worldwide identity technology company called Idemia. Hey, welcome to the program. I'm glad you could come on again, Heather, and I'm glad Blake could be part of this, because I think your marriage is unique because it's a marriage that has been tested by the difficulties of time that happen in a marriage, in a family life. And nowadays, to be married 30 years, first marriage, both, right? Mm-hmm. Is significant. And to be together after 30 years of marriage, it used to be that was common. It's not anymore. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to start things off by talking about one of the top reasons for couples breaking up. The top one was lack of commitment. Now, okay, that is a backdrop. I'll read a little story about, there was this case of a marriage of a guy and a girl, and it's kind of, I have to say it's shocking is beyond that. Basically, a woman, an Arizona woman, I'll read from the New York Post article, an Arizona woman who was the birthing partner of her best friend discovered to her horror that her own husband was the father. After she noticed a rare hereditary birthmark on the girl's neck that was identical to her husband, who was the cheating guy, right? Okay, according to Cater's. Haley Custer, 28, a mother of 4 from Wickenburg, was left heartbroken after finding out her husband, Travis Bowling, 36, allegedly cheated on her with Bestie, I guess her best friend. Custer claimed her now ex-hubby cheated with her at least Custer claimed that her now ex-hubby cheated with at least 30 women during their 6 years of marriage, during which he had 2 children with 2 other people. Ouch. Yeah, and again, I mentioned this in the context of one of the leading causes cited for marital breakups, which is lack of commitment. Up there also, that's like 70%. Up there also with lack of commitment is marital infidelity, about 55%. And, another one was lots of arguing. But I bring this to you guys because, hey, you're a successful marriage, which I hope, till death do you part, as they say, the old wedding vows that not everybody observes anymore. And you have a lot of insight. First of all, I wanted to ask you, Heather, the book, Soul Selfie, working into your marriage and what happened to your marriage, there was a period of time when you and Blake were separated, right? How many years separated?
Off and on, probably a little over 2.
Yeah,
Wow.
around that.
2 years. Yeah. So a couple of years you guys separated and you had leukemia. How does the leukemia and the book work into the marriage separation and everything like that? Give us an idea about that, Heather, please.
Well, I think the main reason I started writing my blog post that later turned into a book was for the very fact that I was just going through a lot of emotions, and initially it was just for the leukemia, and I think just being able to process my fears and worries and everything on paper, I guess, in a way, really helped me to keep my head straight and focus on God and what He has for my life and for my marriage, and work, flip that, like I talk about, flipping that camera back around on myself. What part did I play, and what can I do to bring the healthiest me to my marriage and to every other part of my life.
Great. So at what point did the leukemia happen? After your separation or before, during?
It happened.
No, good, Blake. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, before the separation.
Yeah, the leukemia was before that.
The separation, yes.
A couple of years before that, or more?
Or like probably a year or so, or diagnosed 6 months to a year of remission before the separation.
Yeah. Okay. So give me an idea, gals, before and after. You had like kind of the phase one of the marriage.
Yeah.
And you were together.
Yep. And
then phase two. Talk about phase one, what your relationship was like, how things were going with the kids, your relationship with God.
Yeah.
Here, Blake's a pastor. You do that. I guess you now have like a dual role because you work for another company, another organization, another function. But what was that? What was part one and part two like your marriage?
Yeah.
Give us an idea of that and how God was a part of it.
Absolutely. And I will clarify, I'm not in full-time ministry anymore. I do help out a little bit at some other churches, but I'm a full-time in the private sector right now. Sure. Just to make sure that's clear. I was 20 years as a full-time pastor. So I think, our story is we got married very young, and there's a lot of personal development that you have to go through in life just to figure out who you are and what kind of person you are and your skills and abilities and strengths, weaknesses. And so we had to kind of figure some of that out together. And then we had 3 children as well, which were young. I was in full-time ministry. It was a very hectic, busy life. The church was growing a lot. I think for the most part, things were fairly solid in terms of what a marriage would be. But I think there were some, we both had some character defects that kind of never really got dealt with. They'd bubble up from time to time and go back. We both had baggage from our families of origin that we hadn't always, effectively dealt with. We both accumulated baggage from being in ministry for 20 years. And, that's a hard world to be in at times.
Wow. Yeah.
We both experienced some different kinds of tragedies in our young adult life in terms of just our families. Heather's family had, a very severe car accident that affected a couple of her nephews and her brother and her sister at one point, losses of other loved ones, et cetera. So you have all of that stuff that kind of comes along. And then I left ministry because of some pretty significant burnout, mental health challenges, struggles I was dealing with. And so we kind of worked through that. But I honestly feel like maybe, at least from my perspective, I didn't fully grieve that transition and really address it. I just kind of moved to the next thing. And things were fine for a while, in terms of kind of we tried to keep everything fairly stable after that transition because that's a big deal for our kids and whatnot. And so I think we did a fairly good job of having that transition go smoothly. And I went to work in the private sector. And it was 3 years after that Heather got sick. And on the heels, and then Heather's sickness, as you probably have heard, it deteriorated pretty bad. And she was in the ICU. And we didn't know she was going to live, and we had to fly my son home from college, and it was just a mess. And so I think the accumulation of a lot of stuff, it was almost like once she got well, I imploded. And it took a couple of years of working through stuff on our own, therapy, outside help, spiritual growth, other kinds of work together that eventually I think has brought a measure of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you a question. How old were you two when you got married?
21.
Both were 21?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
I don't
I see another book
recommend it. But
Yeah, I
we
see
had known
another
each
book in
other
the-
since we were, I'm sorry to interrupt, we'd known each other since we
No,
were
that's good.
15. And so, at some point you kind of go, this is the right person. And so am I just, like we've known each other 6 years, is it, just go ahead and bite the bullet and pull the trigger? And
You had to stop stalling after
that's
a
right.
while.
Did you get married in college? I presume you both went to college, right?
After our junior year.
Wow. So, I see another book in the offing, huh? About your marriage. Really. I mean, like going through. I mean, you had all the reasons why that marriage would fail. Getting nowadays, 21 is a young age to marry.
Yes, it is.
It's considered very young. Did you go through? And being a pastor, you're constantly dealing with burnout. You're constantly dealing with marital problems with other people,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so, were you able to bring that home to Heather? And Heather did, and I assume you did, right? A little bit.
Yeah, the stress of ministry, particularly in the last few years, I think the church grew very fast, and we added a lot of staff. And by the end of my time there, we had like 17 paid staff and a volunteer staff every weekend of 450 people. And we had sold property and bought 60 acres and gone through like 3 back-to-back capital campaigns. And so it was just a lot of busyness and work.
Huge, man.
Extra work. And so absolutely. I brought some of that home, but I also learned that the stuff we dealt with in marriage is not any different than anybody else deals with. And you mentioned the commitment and the other things. I found that everything kind of boils down to your finance, romance, and division of labor, which is basically about who's winning. I'm doing more than you, or are you doing more than me? And that's about ego, right? So really it's about finance, romance, and ego. Those are the 3 things that create problems in every marriage: money, sex, and power.
I mean, I'm curious about the whole part about having like to deal with people's problems on a constant basis,
Mhm.
and that's draining.
Mhm.
So, who do you lean on? And I mean, a lot of pastors say, "Hey, look, I leave that at the church," but I don't know. Is that possible? Did that happen, or was there stuff that filtered through because of the stress and the strain of having to do so much with an expanding operation in a church, and then all these? I mean, I assume a lot of people came to you for marital problems and personal problems and tragedies and and faith struggles. Is that right? Were you that type of pastor that was constantly dealing with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I know I was. My training is not in counseling or therapy, and there are people who do that very well. I did meet with people all the time, and I always would meet with people once or twice if I felt like they needed some professional assistance. Our church actually started a counseling center called Living Hope Counseling Center, which had 2 therapists when we started, and now they're still going, and they have like 17 therapists now there, something like that. It's so I would refer people a lot because I really do believe in professional counseling and spiritual guidance in that way. But absolutely, I met with people going through all kinds of difficult situations.
And what a challenge. I mean, how small was the church when you started, Blake?
When I became the
Was it
senior
like
pastor,
tiny or?
it was mid-sized, probably. When I became the senior pastor, our weekly attendance was a little over 300.
And then what did it finally climb to when you bought the acreage and just all the staff? How big did it get?
Yeah, we had probably an average attendance of 1,000, 1,200. Easter, you'd have the big crowds. I always figured there was about 1,500 people that were regular attenders, that were there 2 to 3 weekends a month.
Wow. So there's a lot of growth there, a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
How was it for you, Heather? How did it all Was that a lot? Did that put a lot of strain on the marriage and on you?
I
Or no?
think, our church was really good. We had some leaders that came before us that really set me up well, because the previous pastor's wife really did the things that she was good at, and people were pretty much okay with that. It wasn't like the kind of church, well, Heather has to do everything that no one else is willing to do, or she better learn how to play the piano because we need a piano player. I just did the things that I was good at, and Blake was good about kind of protecting me from getting sucked into those types of things. And we had 3 small children, so that was a really good,
Wow.
I don't want to say it's an excuse, but for us, we
No,
put
that was
them
a
first.
tremendous project.
Yeah.
That's the project of a family. I mean, that's like, it goes beyond a project, because it almost like, it doesn't really reflect the sublime nature of a family, but very occupied, very busy being a mom full time, I guess, right?
Mhm.
So at what point did the things get rocky in your marriage? And how did
after Heather had leukemia, I think I just deteriorated as a person. I just, like I said, imploded. I started having significant mental health issues. I'd had them before and worked through them. Some things when I left ministry, but I probably didn't go as deep as I needed to. I didn't, but I just didn't know. And so, and I didn't understand what it really meant to grieve things. I didn't really understand what it meant to deal with, growing up as a preacher's kid, and having this sense of everybody in the church is my responsibility. I had this kind of sense of, when you grow up as a preacher's kid, my parents didn't say this, but other people would say things like, you're the preacher's kid and everybody's watching you. You have to be a good example. And I kind of carried that into my role as a pastor, and felt like everyone in the church, and now there's, 1,500 people, their life and spirituality is my responsibility. And so I took the weight of the world on my shoulders. When I left ministry, I thought I'd deal with it. I realized when Heather got sick, I didn't. I had just pushed it to the back. And when Heather got sick and more of the weight of the world was on me, I just couldn't bear it anymore. And so that just, I spun into a very deep depression, had just really kind of was lost in a lot of ways. And I was not I was emotionally absent. And and so it was a decision where Heather said, for the betterment of you, me, and for her and the kids, we need to kind of like give each other some space to work on ourselves, which was
well, the thing I would say too is that I knew that one of the things that kept us going, I think, is that I knew that that's not who Blake really was, and that's not who he wanted to be. Sometimes when our mental health gets the better of us, it's hard to get underneath it. And I remember saying that to him, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stick around and figure out because I wasn't sure what was going on. I knew I couldn't fix it, and only he could really work through it. But I knew he was doing the things that he needed to do. He was staying connected to God as well as he could, and praying and journaling and talking to people. We didn't just sit around and do nothing during that time. And I got a counselor, and I had people I was talking to. So we both we went to work on ourselves.
Yeah, I was in therapy as well. I was in a support group as well. And so, I think the efforts we made on each other without having to feel like we had to take care of each other. I think for both of us, we had a sense of codependency on each other, like particularly when Heather got sick. I switched all that sense of my responsibilities on everybody in the church to my responsibility as my wife and my kids. And if they have anything negative that happens to them anyway in life, in any way, shape, or form, then it's obviously all my fault. I should have been there to take care of them. Well, you can't, obviously, with disease. But so it kind of shattered all that stuff inside of me that was not real anyway. And I had to kind of rebuild it in a healthy way.
What did it look like with this depression? Do you have anger outbursts?
Yes.
Yeah. What did it look like?
Yeah, it was anger. It was kind of just coming home and hiding in my room or in the basement, watching sports, but not really engaging. It was just lots of unhealthy coping mechanisms, eating too much, drinking too much. It just was like, I stopped caring. in a lot of ways.
Wow.
I gave up.
By the way,
That's what happened.
okay, this was, sure.
Yeah.
So was this during the leukemia or
This
before
was
it also?
actually after she was in remission. It was
So you
almost,
get like, wow, finally it's over in a sense,
Yeah.
right? One of those big
yeah.
moments of relief. I can let this huge weight off my shoulders and like deal with it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, but it was like, I had this career dream and ministry dream, and that's gone. And I had this, marriage dream, and now my wife is ill. And even though she's now in remission, we don't know what the future holds. It could come back. It took a toll on her physically. We didn't know how that was going to turn out at that time. There was a lot of different things. How is this going to impact our kids as they get older and have their own kids going through what they had to do and watch their mom go through what they, all those kinds of fears and anxieties. There was just all of that. And it just was so out of control and so scary. And yeah, I think I just mentally and emotionally gave up.
How long did that last? You mean the dark period?
I would say the dark period itself probably lasted a year or so. And then, but I didn't move home right away, in which I would, I think we both were in agreement to that. Like, wanted to see the progress a little bit. And I didn't want to jinx the progress that was happening by, coming right back in because of the stressors and the pressures that were here as well. So, I was here every day in the home every day. But there was still enough separation to where, there was able to keep those boundaries and focus working on yourself. And then, and then we just eased it back. I would come and stay for a night or two at a time, or we would go away for the weekend together, and so we kind of eased it back in to make sure that we, handled the transition was smooth for everybody.
And your kids, how are your kids doing at this time? Did it cause a lot of resentment?
Yeah, it did it to a degree.
Some problems.
Each child, is different, and we've seen that play itself out. All the kids have gone to a counselor at least a little bit to talk through it. I think we, at least at this stage, they've probably come through it about as well as they could be expected.
Yeah, we've seen, I think that anytime you have those kinds of situations that your living amends to people is just your changed life. And that takes time. And the kids, I know that when they have issues that they need to talk through, more often than not, they'll call Blake versus me, especially if it has anything to do with money or details of things that I'm not that good at. But they want his opinion and they respect him, and because I think they've seen that his change and transformation is real, and it also shows that they have healed some from that relationship with, if there was resentment, that it's easing over time.
What are the insights you bring to bear? I mean, look, we know that a sense of commitment important. That's of course tied with marriage, right? But love is at the top, and wow, it's what is love? This is kind of an odd question to ask. I want to ask you, Heather, because I think a lot of people watching this video, some might say, "Hey, man, I want politics. Give me the red meat." Joe Biden. What has he forgotten now? This week, where did he get lost? What did Kamala Harris do that was especially cringeworthy? But a lot of the people watching this are married right now, or they're about to get married, maybe. And love is that incredibly marvelous thing that just drives people towards the altar and to stay married and all, or to not stay married because there's no love there anymore. And I've been married twice. My first wife died, left me with 5 kids. It was insane. We had to flee a country. I was going to be kidnapped or assassinated. Yeah, it's a long story. I want to bore you. But the thing is that in 9.5 years, we had 5 kids. And then my wife dies. And one of the children got cancer. It was leukemia. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you something. It sounds trite to say. In many ways, it's statistically easier for a child to deal with leukemia from the standpoint of survivability than an adult. So my applause to you. So I always like to ask this question for the benefit of young people or people who are currently married going through difficulty. What is love? What is love really? Heather, give me your shotgun blast on that.
Yeah, that's a very big question. I think what I can say, I don't know if I can give you a great definition of that, but what I can say to people, if someone asks me, what what was the secret, or what's the key to staying married or getting back together with someone after being separated. It's kind of that phrase we hear all the time, it's not you, it's me. And what we found in our relationship anyway, is that the best progress we've made in staying healthy and happy as a married couple is when we went to work on ourselves. That, I know
Wow.
it's kind of been overdone, but the whole idea that, the Jerry Maguire, you complete me, is bogus, because I need to be complete before I come to my marriage and bring my best self to the table. And he needs to do the work that he needs to do. And when we're both spiritually fit and going to, talking to the people that encourage us and praying and going to God and going to church and working on ourselves and flipping that camera back around on ourselves, our marriage is fairly easy. When we get out of step with any of those things, we start getting resentful because he didn't read my mind and empty the dishwasher when I wanted him to, when I was
Sure. It happens on both sides.
Yeah, and it just, those kinds of things,
Right.
like
So,
he
but-
was
but-
saying, they just build. Resentments build over little things until they become really big things that you just can't get over. So
Sure. And
I guess,
so, right.
yeah, work on yourself. That's the best.
So
thing
then,
to
so
do.
then, so you, I mean, that's an integral part of love. If you love him or he loves you, he's going to work on himself to be better, because you can't change him, but you can change you. And
Right.
Blake can't change Heather, but Blake can change himself.
Right.
Right.
And
that's essential. No? Or
Very
what?
much.
in traditional counseling, I think we had heard over the years, we would, at least this is my opinion, is we would get in there and it was all our grievance. We air our grievances, and then we come up with a plan for Blake to do this so that Heather can be okay, and Heather can do this so that Blake can be okay. And then neither of us can fulfill those things, and we end up angry and failing. Whereas when we just did counseling, not to say you should never do marriage counseling together, but we gained a lot more ground, I feel like, when we just did our own, got healthy ourselves. And then those things we brought to the marriage, there weren't those fights over petty things, because we were minding our own business about stuff, and it just works much better.
When you look at your marriage, looking back, what does love look like? Besides, the obvious, the emotion, I love you, and I'll give you a beautiful $4,000 engagement ring, and, we'll go on a $10,000 honeymoon, a $20,000 wedding. But what does love really look like, Heather, as a mother and as a wife? Is that too hard? I mean,
yeah, that's
the answer to partially. I mean, I know that, because you mentioned something so important. That is that it's about me being better for him. It's about me making myself a better wife. I think that's what you answered. But what else does it look like? And I think we have I'm doing this. I'm being a pushy New Yorker because in successful marriages, there's another concept of love, and I'd like you to share it if you can a little more. Is there anything any anecdotes?
Can I jump in?
Please.
Am I allowed?
Of course, yes, please.
One of the best pictures to me is of a description of love. I've always thought was the prayer of Saint Francis. Do you know that prayer? Seek not.
I've heard it, but tell me. No, give it.
I won't be able to recite the whole thing, but it's basically.
But paraphrase.
Yeah, seek not to understand. Seek not to be understood. Seek to understand. Seek not for your needs to be met. Seek to meet other people's needs. It's that idea that true agape love is about putting others first, and to me that's what love is. Am I willing to say I will try to be the best spouse I can be and put Heather first, not in an unhealthy way, not in a codependent way, but in a healthy way. Put Heather first, and then I'll just trust God that He'll meet my needs. It's really about, and I think it's that Ephesians 5 mutual submission idea, that we put each other's needs above our own and trust God to meet ours. And that same mentality works in the rest of our lives, putting other people's, I think to me, that's the kingdom in action, putting other people's needs first and trusting God will meet mine.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to share, because my wife and I went through so many crazy times. We get married in 1995, my first wife. Okay. And, so, like we're talking 8 months later, we're fleeing the country, fleeing Colombia. And then like a month and a half later, we have our first baby, first son, John. But the thing, and lots of illnesses, lots of job problems, losing my job. I mean, being like a refugee in my own country with my poor wife, and she having to put up with all this stuff. And the thing that sticks out of my mind about marriage, and I think you can talk about this and maybe give me some anecdotes, but it's like, getting up at 3 a.m. to change a baby's diaper, taking a child to an ER with a leukemia and with an infection with leukemia, it's no big deal. Normally you have an infection, you have a cold or you have a fever, no big deal. But when you have leukemia, it can be serious.
Yeah.
It can be life-threatening. So having to rush a child to a hospital, that to me is love.
Mm-hmm.
Or having to say, something, my wife really likes this type of ice cream. It's a pain. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to get it. She would like it. You know what I mean? And
it's thinking of someone else over yourself. It's exactly what you're thinking someone else over yourself.
Yeah, and that's right. Yeah. That meal I don't like, but she made, or that place that he wants to go to that I don't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a constant thing, So you guys go through a rocky period. Mm-hmm. And then things turned around. What was your prayer life like? What was going on when things were like going badly in the marriage? Was your prayer life going badly?
I think actually when when we're going through the hardest things, I think that's when our prayer lives, even though they might, our will might be fighting against God's will, that a lot of times our prayers are more honest and intimate and real with God than any other time. And sometimes it's just, like I think we talked about on the show before, Jesus, I surrender myself to you, take care of everything. And because you can't come up with all the answers. You don't know any of the solutions. You just need help. And sometimes it's just yourself in the dark, sobbing or crying or screaming at God, which I think he can handle. Mm-hmm. And he shows up for that. So even when we were both struggling and angry at each other and angry at God, sometimes it's kind of like anything, you just got to keep going back to him.
There's an old saying that pain is the touchstone of all growth. And so I think there was a lot of growth that happened actually spiritually as a result of that pain, which was a good thing. The other thing I've heard said from time to time is one of the greatest gifts of spiritual growth is the gift of desperation.
The gift of that be a gift, man. That's amazing. Tell us about that.
It resets your sense of dependence on God, in my opinion. That's what it did for me and for us. When you're desperate, whether it's because your wife is sick or whether you're melting down and you're struggling with sense of purpose and a meaning, desire to do life, when you're struggling through all that stuff, that desperate sense of that desperation, that pain that you're in, that existential pain, in our case, drove us to seek God even more strongly.
Is there to do it the right way? Was there a moment that you can kind of say, "Hey, we're in the middle of a flight and things turned around"? What was that? Do you remember that? Did you actually have consciousness of like, wow, looking back, that was when things started to improve?
I think for me, I had a sense
he was going to be okay, and I
trust in you, God.
Yep. Because we can't, with God. Anything in life, we don't know that what's going to come. Just because we obey and because we're okay, God's there to help us be okay, even when everything around us isn't. And so just because he decides that he's okay doesn't mean God's going to make his marriage work out. It doesn't mean God's going to make him not get cancer again or something else worse happen. It just means that you trust that God's got you no matter what happens.
Maybe it was a Martha versus Mary moment. Remember that story in the gospel about Mary and Martha? And Martha is all like upset. And meanwhile, Mary is just drinking it all in, Jesus talking, giving his words of wisdom, and then, and she gets upset. Doesn't it bother you that I'm doing all this work and look at her, she's lazy, sitting there, taking it all in.
Yeah.
And then, and I wonder if does that characterize, did you have in your first part of your marriage, was that a Martha phase versus the second part, a Mary phase of more trusting with God? Is that accurate?
Yes, very much so.
I think, or
no, I think very much so, especially in ministry. You can. I think one of my realizations is that all of that, I was still running on my own self-propulsion. I was doing everything I had to do and hoping God blessed it, as opposed to going where God was already working. I don't know that things would have been different on the outside, but I think on the inside, it would have been different for me. I heard a pastor years ago say one of the major challenges of being in ministry is if you allow doing the work of God to destroy the work of God in you.
And your family,
and
your marriage, right?
Yeah, and it's a tough path.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, I've got this project to do. I'm an activist. It's either me or nothing, and so, I got to do it, right? Versus, hey, I'm putting it, it's a mess. I'm leaving it in God's hands.
Right.
Now, the second phase of the marriage, I think it happened, you had more trust. Tell us about how the marriage improved once that trust issue and the resignation to God's will, was embraced. How did things change in the marriage, Heather? Did you see?
I would just say we don't have disagreements too often, but when we do, even if they feel scared, sometimes they scare me a little bit and I overreact because I don't want to go back there. I tend to be an extremist.
Yeah, sure.
If one thing comes up and now I'm like, everything's always and never and all that kind of thing for me. I'm dramatic. So we have disagreements here and there, but what I've noticed is that we're able to work through them more quickly because we have tools and we have growth edges that we've discovered over the past few years of reading and working and talking to people and praying and getting our ego out of there. That's 90% of the things we fight about is ego and who's right. And, they always say you can be right or you can be happy. So whenever one of us is insisting on being right, things don't go very well. And most of the time, if we're taking good care of ourselves spiritually and regularly meeting with people who are encouraging that growth, things go amazingly well.
Mm-hmm.
But we work pretty hard on that and turning that over to God. And when I say work hard, I mean we're mindful of God's part in everything that we do or try to be.
Right. So just thinking to myself, there's some interesting things I saw on this and all this stuff. It's funny how I literally lost it. I had all this stuff. It was incredible data. Like, the highest divorce rates in this country, in the United States. And one of the things that came out was that certain professions have a higher divorce rate than others. And at the top was like people working in the gaming industry, bartenders, and dancers, goodness gracious. And then at the lower end of the totem pole was like agricultural engineers, podiatrists and optometrists. That was funny, like kind of a stable type of job. I don't think, a podiatrist is going to, it doesn't take care of a hangnail right. And, or athlete's foot, and then he or she gets sued. Maybe it's not like, if you're an orthopedist or a surgeon or, a cardiologist or, these other professions with all the stress and problems.
Plus,
and then pastors were.
I was going to say, plus, if you have kind of a rock star type personality, like if you enjoy a lot of whatever, farming and podiatry is probably not the career choice you're going to make if that's your personality.
Exactly.
So.
It's a little bit on the little dull, but so it's stable. You get a stable income, and it means predictable hours. You're not going to be called in the emergency room, doctor.
Yeah.
I have a problem with my nail again. It's not going to probably happen. Maybe with a heart patient, that's going to happen, or the bartender, of course, or the dancer is going to get all sorts of problems happening. You've seen a lot of marriages go well and go badly.
And you have this issue with infidelity, which can be pretty big. There's lots of issues of people looking online on porn sites. I mean, shocking. I mean, that was probably going on. You were a couple of years you've been out of ministry, but of active ministry. But there's an issue that I don't know if you'd say you agree with me that since women, out of 10 marriages, 8 times out of 10, women are the ones who initiate it. And so what's going on there? I mean, why is this happening? A lot of people will say, well, I'm not getting satisfaction with my wife and no intimacy, so I seek it from elsewhere. Why is that happening? I mean, is feminism to blame in part? Not to blame it on women, but I don't blame it on women. But I think in the 20th century, in the 21st century, there have been certain mentalities that have become extremely pervasive in society that have been very damaging to marriage. Any comments? Open microphone.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of men that dealt with pornography temptations, and it is something that is growing among women as well, according to the statistics that you see. I actually don't maybe I'm too simple, but I tend to not overcomplicate things. I think it is simply an unhealthy coping mechanism. I think we all have different ones. Some people's orientation might be to go eat a bunch of chips, or some people it may be to drink too much. Some people may turn to pills. Some people may spend, $300, $500, $1,000 on shoes, online. I mean, and so I think, and for pornography, it's the same thing. I think what people are looking for, we're stressed, we're anxious, we're worried, we're angry, we're scared, and we don't know what to do with all those different emotions. And I can go to God with it, or I can go talk to a therapist or whatever, but that takes time. And a quick fix, at least for the short run, is to do whatever behavior, pornography would be one, which gives me a little shot of dopamine, which gets me through the next couple hours. Doesn't solve anything, but I think that's honestly what it does. And some people will be bent that way because that's just their personality and their wiring. Other people might be bent toward different addictions or food or, spending, whatever.
If you count physical and emotional infidelity, this is another thing. In other words, you have a married couple and there's a lot of problems in the marriage, a lot of dysfunction. And the husband or the wife say, hey, my husband's like he's an ogre. He's just constantly angry. He's like unresponsive. All he does is he goes out and makes money. That's it. If he makes money, but he never gives me any understanding. So she becomes, maybe the first step is emotionally involved with somebody, or flipping the other side of the situation. It can be the man that my wife is cold, distant, hostile, always critical. And so he starts up with an old flame, just texting. And then, by the way, in divorce cases, it's extremely common to find Facebook involved. But now I think he's going to call it what? Meta book or Meta or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that people start to look for outside the marriage and they commit infidelity emotionally a lot of times, and then it escalates to physical infidelity, although it may not always do that. But there's a tremendous amount of emotional infidelity that's taking place because men and women are going outside their marriage to find the support they need and they're not getting. So, hey, what's the message as a pastor? What's your message that you have to tell to wives? And I want to ask Heather, what's the message that you have for husbands looking at all the things you've learned as a pastor's wife and in society as somebody who's constantly on the go as a realtor? What's your advice for wives? That they're married and
maybe I should say the wives one. And
no, I think that's why he wants it to do.
Okay, fine.
My advice for, well, I mean,
you have experience being a wife, and you know what bothers you.
Yeah, I know the answer to the wife one.
Man, I don't know.
We can then change it if you want. Go ahead.
I don't know that I have all the answers to tell ladies. I mean, there are definitely things that they can do that can be helpful in their marriage, but it's not their responsibility is not to make their husband okay. He has to make himself okay in his relationship with God. One of the things that Heather mentioned before this call that she said, if you have a chance to talk about, and I guess this is a good time, is what this metaphor that I used all through my ministry time, which is the concept I call it the bucket concept. And the idea is that everybody has a certain amount of things that they want in their bucket from a relationship. And everybody has those. We grow up in a family. We have expectations that are given to us. We have dreams. This is what marriage is going to be, whatever. And we have this bucket and we get married and we find a person that meets, let's say there's 10 things in the bucket and we find a person that meets 8 of those 10 needs. The truth is there's nobody that meets all 10. That's not possible. Only God can meet all of them. But maybe we find somebody that meets 8 of the 10 and we get married. Okay, great. And you get married and you go along for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And you're so used to those 8 things being met all the time, you don't even notice them anymore. But what you start noticing are the 2 that have never been met. And then you meet somebody outside, at work or someplace that meets those 2 needs. And you think, oh, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. Those 2 things that have been in my bucket this whole time have never gotten met. That's what I need. And so what happens is then people leave their first spouse who met the 8 needs and go with the other person, and they finally get those 2 needs met. But then 2 years into that second marriage, they realize that's the only 2 needs that person met. They don't meet any of the previous 8 that the other person did. And now you're actually worse off than you were before. And I saw that happen over and over and over and over. And so it really is about understanding what are the things that my spouse can't need, and then what are and then what are healthy ways to get those needs met through God and through healthy.
Right. So, but okay.
Yeah.
Right. So is there anything though that as a man and as a pastor that dealt with lots of problems, talking with lots of men about their wives? And don't worry, Heather, I'll go to you on the other side of the picture. That it comes up again and again and again in conversations with men who have marital problems. What is it?
Just grow up. It sounds harsh for men. For men, it's grow up. Don't be so selfish. I would talk to couples.
That's for the men. That's for the men, right?
That's for the men.
But for the women.
Yeah. For the women.
How about for the women?
Yeah, for the women, well, there's some of that too for the women. And for the women, I would say you work on forgiveness. I find my experience in talking to a lot of women over the years was they would carry lots of little resentments. And I would meet with a couple, they've been married 12 years, and she would say, I can't stand him anymore. And I would say, what happened? And there wasn't a big deal. It was just 12 years of him being out one night for bowling and the next night for golf. And he was never home. He was working all the time. He was playing all the time. He wasn't attentive, and he never helped in the house. He never did the dishes. He never did the diapers. And all of a sudden the resentments just start piling up. And not that that's acceptable, but working on forgiveness and then healthy ways to deal with those tensions, as opposed to that resentment starts to build up and it literally will harden one's heart to the point of no return.
Right. And so, Heather, how about you? Your perspective. What is it that talking to your friends, your girlfriends, being a pastor's wife? Maybe you probably talked to you ended up maybe talking with a lot of members of the congregation that had problems with their husbands. So what's your perspective on that? What is it that husbands need to hear that maybe they don't want to hear, that they need to improve on?
Well, I think there's obviously every woman's a little bit different in what they desire in their spouse. So some of them, when they're getting some needs met, then those other ones aren't that important. But I know one of the things that has been good in our marriage that Blake does really well is, like what he said, the kind of acts of service for the other person. That doesn't mean you're their slave, but you're thinking of them once in a while, and like what you said, getting them your favorite ice cream. One time, Blake actually, do you remember this? When our middle child was just born, I was a hot mess and postpartum and everything, and he knew I liked Jamocha almond fudge ice cream, particularly from the Schwann's man. So one day he actually chased the Schwann's man that comes around to your house.
They might not have that. It's a truck, ice cream truck.
It's like an ice cream food truck that delivers to your house. So he saw one driving down the road, and he pulled them over and bought a half or whatever, those are pint of ice cream for me and brought it home. And just that act of knowing that at least for a little bit might help probably both of us have a better day, things like that, and acts of service. But also, women, we love intimacy and all that, but like the sexiest thing, I think, for most of my friends, for them to see in a woman is a man helping them in some way, helping around the house or doing something nice to make their load less hectic, helping with the kids. It's really hard for women to transition from being a mom and putting kids to bed to being sexy in the bedroom in half an hour. Like, help put the kids to bed. That will be sexy. That will maybe get you the men.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all about putting the other person first,
Yep.
Yeah,
right.
And looking for neat ways to meet some of the needs that seem silly, but for a woman, especially if you are running a household and you're feeling like there's never an end to your day, for them to do even a couple things that just alleviate some of that stress, that is endearing to women. And those are, like what Blake said, over years, the women can be resentful over a million little things that you never picked up, or whatever. So,
yeah, and so,
it adds up.
and it really bothers. I mean, it really grates. Like, he still doesn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
While the man is saying, oh man, she never gets it as far as like making a big deal about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, well, again, it gets back to, the husband can change himself, but he can't change the wife, and the wife can't change the husband, but she sure can't change herself.
Mm-hmm.
So is this something you write about in HeatherCarterWrites.com?
Yep. And actually, I was just looking up a post that I wrote. If you go to my blog site at HeatherCarterWrites.com, you can search by category and the various posts. And one of the categories is on marriage. So that I was just actually reading some of them this morning. That kind of helped me. I have to do that pretty regularly to remind myself what I believe about things and make sure I'm still doing them. But there's also one on there that people might check out, and it's called Martha, 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 kind of like the Marsha, Marsha, Marsha of the Brady Bunch, but it is about Mary and Martha. And since you referenced that earlier, it made me think of that same idea.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, it just came to me. It came to me because I try to read the gospel every day. And that's the thing. I mean, I think we live, people, conservatives, Christians are caught up in activism. And I think it's really problematic. And whether it's like, hey, I've got to save, this project is really important. It's going to save lives. It's vital for the nation. It's vital for my community. But then you have what's happening in the meantime is your family might be disintegrating. So what about that? So
you can't do the work for God.
Let God do that huge heavy lifting. There's this great author. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Red Bradley. I haven't talked to him in a long time. He's on the West Coast and he's a minister. And he talks about, he wrote a book called, and he actually hated the title, but it was a really good title at the same time. He had to admit it was a good title. He didn't come up with it, but it was a good title, which is that you're born liberal and raised right. And in other words, like, we're all selfish, man. We come out we're the playpen and I want the toy. Now, the little kids, they either learn to be concerned about others, their younger brother, younger sister, or their mom, their dad, whatever, or they don't, and they become selfish children, selfish adolescents, and miserably selfish young adults. And then they go on to have like unhappy marriages for some darn reason. That's because,
that's not a
try to raise them.
The ego
really bad,
and marriage.
Right. And so it's so important that kids, the parents teach the kids to be the type of individuals people want to be around because they're concerned, they're generous and they're considerate, which is really important, which is all, I think, the secret of marriage, I don't know. But is there anything you want to say in sum that it's like a message for young marriage that you're not that you're that old. I mean, you've been married 30 years. Imagine you're like north of 40 somewhere, So anyway.
Barely.
Big 5-0.
But what can you tell people? Yeah, the big 5-0, man. What can you tell young people that are just about to get married or recently married or pretty young and go through marital problems?
I think just to demystify it a little bit, I think we live in this world now where we believe, where you hear so much like, if it doesn't make you happy, don't do it. There's a lot of stuff in life that you need to do that doesn't make you happy, right? Like, I don't want to do laundry, but I need to. And it's the same way with marriage. Like, if you just think, if every moment of my marriage isn't making me happy, it's because there's something wrong with it. That's a wrong way to view it. I think people view it that way, though. I think, I remember one time an older couple saying, what are you going to do when you wake up in bed next to this person and look over and go, I cannot stand this person?
Wow.
But see, that happens in every marriage, right? And there's times where you just get on each other's skin, get under each other's skin. And I just think that people in their modern culture think like somehow there's something wrong, or like I made a wrong choice if that happens. That's just a part of the normal process of growing into this marriage thing.
Mm-hmm. And we just,
I think of being, go ahead.
All right, I was gonna say, we just went and saw comedian Nate Bargatze, if you ever seen him. It's hilarious, but
What's his or her name?
Nate Bargatze, Bargatze.
He's from Nashville. He's very clean.
Nice, really great comedian. But he was talking about marriage stuff, and he was saying how, I don't remember how exactly he said it, but basically, I look over at my wife and I think there are like 600,000 other people in this world I would rather sit and watch a movie with than you. And sometimes you just have that thought. You're just like, you're my least favorite person on the planet right now.
Right now.
At this moment. It's probably not going to last, but that's not when you make your decisions about whether or not your marriage is a good marriage or not. But somehow you sitting right there just makes me want to go crazy, but that's not going to probably last. And it happens in marriages. And, I would just say, I guess what I would tell people is, I know in, they talk in marriage ceremonies even, is that where it talks about the two shall become one. And I think the important thing to remember is to not take that to the extreme, because even though you are one in your marriage, you're still responsible for you. And so you're in charge of you getting the help you need to get healthier and stronger and grow in your personal relationship with God. And whether or not your spouse does that, you're still accountable to God for how you act, for keeping your side of the street clean, for your reaction to their bad reaction, whichever day that might be. And I think that's really important. And if they're having a bad day, you don't have to have a bad day. And if they're, no matter what is happening, you're still responsible just for yourself. And then that's going to really help your marriage.
I can never forget, I was newly married in Florida, and there was a mass, and there was this married couple that was retaking their marriage vows. And so I started with the conversation afterwards, and it was a Colombian guy, and I lived in Colombia a long time. My first wife, may she rest in peace, was from there. And so I started talking to him, and he didn't speak English very well, but I said, so what's the secret? 50 years of marriage, man, that's amazing. And he goes to me, and you have to understand Spanish, but I'll explain it. I said, what's your secret? He goes, la ley del guante. Guante. In Spanish, guante is glove. And so I said, the glove law, the law of guante? What do you mean? Aguante, aguante, aguante. And guante means in Spanish, it means just put up with it, put up with it, put up with it. In other words, like just tolerate it. And he was able to have 50 years of marriage. And it was funny, but it's true, because there's so many things that really are not so transcendent about, like, for example, I hate the fact that my wife does this, or that she always, like, she doesn't make my coffee right, or, big deal. And then the wife says, well, certain things he doesn't, he doesn't, like, he's concerned about the fact that the house is disorderly when he comes in the door. It doesn't say, honey, how have you been? Putting up with that stuff is important. And again, it gets back to what you said. You can change you, but you can't change him. And you can change yourself, but you can't change your wife, Heather. So it's super important. Because there's too much divorce, and divorce causes huge problems with children. Children suffer tremendously because of divorce. So many bad things happen because of divorce, and so many good things happen because the husband and wife stick it out, So anyway, yeah. So folks, Blake and Heather Carter, thank you for being on the Bill McIntosh Show.
Thank you.
Hopefully thank you for the content, the interesting content about a marriage that's been through difficult times and been able to get through it. Heather Carter Writes is Heather Carter's blog. She's the author of Soul Selfie, a book you must get.
Yes, please.
Because if you're spending too much time on Facebook, it's going to hurt your marriage. And let me tell you something. You have a successful marriage, it's beautiful. And if you don't, it's a huge bummer. Okay.
Thank you.
All right,
bye-bye.
thanks, Bill.
Can you see by twilight lies gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars rule the perilous fight. Oh, the red marks we watched were so gallantly streaming. Get the rocket trembling, the bomb bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Just as
That's your national anthem.